If the chocolate milk is poisoned, we'll know in a minute, someone whispered, and not a single German woman reached for the glass. September 1944 arrived with cool mornings across central Kansas, but the air inside the transport truck felt heavy enough to stop breathing. 8 German women sat shoulder to shoulder on narrow wooden benches, their gray uniforms wrinkled from days of travel, their hands folded tightly in their laps, as if movement alone might invite trouble. Anna Fisher kept her eyes on the floorboards beneath her boots. 24 years old, once a hospital nurse in Bavaria, she had learned that silence often survived longer than hope. Every mile across America had only deepened the stories repeated inside the truck. The guards would eventually reveal their true intentions. The smiles would disappear. The kindness would end. That was what they had been taught before capture, and fear has a strange way of sounding truthful when it is repeated often enough. The truck rolled through a pair of tall wooden gates and slowed to a stop beside a cluster of clean white buildings surrounded by endless fields. Anna noticed something immediately. There were no burn walls, no shattered windows. Beyond the fences, rows of corn moved gently beneath the September wind, while red barns stood untouched beneath an open blue sky. The peace almost felt suspicious. A young American soldier opened the rear gate without shouting. "Careful stepping down," he said in calm English before repeating the same instruction more slowly. None of the women answered. They climbed down one by one, expecting barking orders that never came. Instead, another soldier simply pointed toward a low brick building where warm light spilled through large windows. The smell reached them before they crossed the doorway. Rich chocolate, fresh butter, warm sugar. Someone behind Anna quietly inhaled before catching herself, embarrassed by the instinct. The dining hall looked nothing like the dark rooms they had imagined. Sunlight rested across polished wooden tables. White curtains drifted gently beside open windows. Metal trays waited in perfect rows. On each tray sat a square chocolate brownie beside a tall glass filled with cold chocolate milk. Condensation rolled slowly down every glass, leaving tiny circles of water on the trays below. No one moved. Anna stared at the brownie. Its cracked top reminded her of winter afternoons long before the war, when her father had carried flour home from the neighborhood bakery and her mother experimented with American recipes copied from an old magazine. She had not thought about those afternoons in years. Memory arrived so suddenly it almost hurt. "Don't touch it," one woman whispered behind her in German. "They're waiting." Another nodded almost immediately. Why would they give prisoners chocolate? The question hung in the room unanswered. Around them, the American kitchen workers continued placing trays on tables with quiet efficiency, speaking to one another about coffee, deliveries, and tomorrow's breakfast, as though this were an ordinary morning instead of a meeting between enemies. Anna searched every face for mockery, anger, or triumph. She found only routine. Even that unsettled her. Fear was easier to understand than normal kindness. The silence inside the dining hall became almost unbearable. 8 untouched glasses. 8 untouched brownies. 8 women waiting for something terrible to happen first. The minutes stretched so slowly that the ice inside the glasses began to soften. Tiny drops slid down the smooth sides and collected beneath each glass, while the chocolate milk remained untouched. Anna could hear every sound inside the dining hall with startling clarity. A spoon resting against a metal pan. A screen door opening somewhere behind the kitchen. The quiet hum of an electric refrigerator. Ordinary sounds from an ordinary morning, yet none of them eased the tension gripping the room. Every woman waited for someone else to make the first mistake. One of the younger prisoners, Elise Becker, barely 20 years old, leaned closer to Anna without taking her eyes off the tray. "Do you remember what they told us?" she whispered in German. Anna answered without moving her lips. "I remember. They had been warned that appearances could deceive, that friendliness could hide humiliation, that comfort could be used to weaken resolve. Those lessons had followed them across the Atlantic like invisible luggage. Even now, surrounded by polished tables and the scent of fresh baking, those old warnings felt louder than the voices in the room. Across the hall, an American cook carrying another tray slowed as he noticed the untouched meal. He exchanged a puzzled glance with a woman wearing a white kitchen apron before quietly setting the tray down and returning to the serving counter. No one laughed. No one looked irritated. They simply continued their work. That puzzled Anna more than anger would have. She had expected resentment from people whose sons and brothers were still fighting overseas. Instead, she found calm faces occupied with coffee pots, bread baskets, and breakfast schedules. Outside the open windows, a breeze carried the smell of cut grass across the camp. Somewhere beyond the fence, a tractor started its engine and rolled into a nearby field. The steady rhythm drifted through the morning air, mixing with the distant call of meadowlarks. Life continued beyond the prison camp with surprising normality. Anna wondered how a country at war could sound so peaceful. She lowered her eyes again to the square brownie resting on the white plate. The cracked surface caught the sunlight, revealing tiny pieces of walnut baked into the chocolate. It looked homemade rather than factory-made. Someone had taken the time to prepare it carefully. That thought unsettled her almost as much as the dessert itself. War usually removed time for such small acts. Then the dining hall door opened once more. The conversations among the American staff faded naturally, not because anyone had been ordered to stop, but because someone familiar had entered the room. A tall officer stepped inside wearing a neatly pressed olive drab uniform with captain's bars catching the morning light. His boots echoed softly across the polished wooden floor as he walked without hurry between the tables. He acknowledged the kitchen workers with a small nod before looking toward the 8 untouched trays. His expression showed neither disappointment nor amusement. It was simply thoughtful, as though he had quietly understood the reason before anyone spoke a single word. Anna met his eyes for only a second before looking away. She expected questions. She expected instructions. Instead, the captain paused beside the nearest table, rested one hand lightly against the back of an empty chair, and studied the untouched glasses in complete silence while every person in the room seemed to stop breathing at once. Captain James Carter remained beside the table for several quiet seconds, allowing the silence to settle instead of trying to break it. He looked from one untouched tray to the next before resting his gaze on the nearest glass of chocolate milk. Without asking anyone to move, he reached for it with steady hands. The glass felt cold against his fingers, beads of water slipping slowly onto the polished wood beneath. Every pair of eyes followed the motion. Anna noticed that even the kitchen workers had stopped what they were doing. No one seemed to know what would happen next. The captain lifted the glass to eye level for only a moment, as though examining nothing more complicated than breakfast. Then he took a slow drink. He did not rush. He did not make a speech. He swallowed once, lowered the glass, and set it gently back onto the tray. A faint ring of moisture remained where it touched the table. The room stayed perfectly still. After several more seconds, he broke off a small corner of the brownie beside the glass. The crisp top gave way with a soft crackle, revealing a warm center scented with cocoa and butter. He tasted the piece thoughtfully, nodded once to himself, and finished chewing before speaking. The baker arrived before sunrise, he said in a calm voice. She would probably be disappointed if breakfast went home untouched. His words carried no sarcasm. They sounded almost conversational, the sort of remark someone might make in a small-town diner rather than inside a prisoner of war camp. A few of the American workers exchanged brief smiles before returning quietly to their stations. Captain Carter looked toward the women again. "No one here will force you to eat," he continued. "If you would rather wait, that is your choice." With that, he stepped away from the table and poured himself a cup of black coffee from a nearby enamel pot. He leaned lightly against the serving counter, speaking with one of the cooks about flour deliveries expected later that afternoon. The conversation drifted naturally through the room, touching on harvest season, cooler weather, and whether enough apples would arrive for next week's pies. Nothing about it resembled a performance. Anna watched every movement carefully. If this had been staged, it was unlike anything she had ever imagined. The captain had not tried to persuade them. He had simply shared the same breakfast placed before them. Across the table, Elise studied the half-empty glass he had used. "If he wished to frighten us," she whispered, "he chose a strange way to do it." Anna did not answer immediately. Instead, she noticed the aroma rising from the brownie again, warm chocolate mingling with fresh milk and brewed coffee. The scent awakened another memory from years before the war, one she had buried beneath too many difficult seasons. For the first time since entering the dining hall, fear loosened its grip just enough to make room for curiosity. Anna remained motionless for another long moment, listening to the gentle clink of dishes as the kitchen staff returned to their work. Nothing about the room suggested urgency. No one watched the prisoners with impatient eyes. The captain stood near the coffee pot, quietly thanking one of the cooks before carrying his mug toward an open window where the September breeze stirred the white curtains. He seemed entirely unconcerned with whether anyone chose to eat. That unexpected patience unsettled Anna more deeply than commands ever could. Across the table, Elise slowly reached one trembling hand toward her glass before stopping several inches away. She looked to Anna, silently asking a question neither of them could answer. Anna lowered her eyes to the brownie resting on the white plate. The rich scent of cocoa lingered in the warm air, joined now by the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and bread cooling somewhere inside the kitchen. She remembered another kitchen far away, where autumn mornings began with flour dust floating through narrow beams of sunlight, while her father measured ingredients with careful hands. Before hospitals, before uniforms, before every familiar sound became part of another lifetime. The memory appeared so vividly that she could almost hear the old wooden spoon striking the side of a mixing bowl. She closed her eyes for only a second before opening them again. When she looked up, Captain Carter happened to glance in her direction. He offered nothing more than a polite nod before returning his attention to the view outside. There was no challenge in the gesture, no expectation, only quiet acknowledgement. Anna inhaled slowly. Her fingers finally reached the edge of the plate. The brownie felt surprisingly warm, as though it had come from the oven not long before their arrival. The thin crust gave a delicate crack beneath her fingertips, revealing a soft center studded with small walnut pieces. She broke away the smallest corner she could manage. The room seemed to grow impossibly still. Even Elise stopped breathing for a heartbeat. Anna studied the tiny piece resting in her hand. It looked entirely ordinary. She raised it carefully, hesitated once more, and placed it on her tongue. The chocolate melted almost immediately, followed by the gentle sweetness of butter, sugar, and vanilla. The walnuts added a quiet crunch that reminded her of family holidays from years she had believed were gone forever. Nothing happened except the taste itself. No hidden bitterness. No unpleasant surprise. Only warmth. She swallowed slowly, almost uncertain that such a simple moment could feel so unfamiliar. Her shoulders relaxed without her realizing it. Elise searched her face anxiously. Anna looked back at her friend and gave the smallest nod she could manage. It was barely visible, yet it carried more certainty than any speech. One by one, the other women exchanged cautious glances. Elise reached for her own brownie and broke off a tiny piece. Another prisoner lifted her glass of chocolate milk, studying the light brown color before taking a careful sip. The silence inside the dining hall changed almost imperceptibly. It was no longer the silence of fear. It had become the silence of people discovering that one deeply held belief might not survive the simple truth placed quietly before them. The first sip of chocolate milk came almost by accident. Anna lifted the cool glass with both hands, feeling the condensation dampen her fingertips before bringing it cautiously to her lips. The drink was colder than she expected, smooth and lightly sweet, with a rich cocoa flavor that lingered gently after each swallow. For several quiet seconds she forgot where she was. Her mind traveled instead to a small kitchen in Bavaria where winter snow rested against the windowsills while her mother warmed milk on a cast-iron stove. On rare occasions, when enough cocoa could be found, the entire house filled with the same comforting aroma now drifting through the dining hall. The memory arrived without warning, carrying with it the sound of laughter she had not heard in years. It was not grief she felt. It was recognition. Some ordinary moments survived even after history tried to erase them. Across the table, Elise finally released a long breath she seemed to have been holding since the truck entered the camp. She took another careful bite of her brownie before allowing herself the smallest smile. One by one, the remaining women reached for their breakfasts. No one rushed. Every movement remained cautious, almost ceremonial, as though they were learning unfamiliar customs rather than eating a morning meal. The room slowly filled with quiet sounds that had been absent only minutes earlier. Forks touched ceramic plates. Glasses rested softly on wooden tables. Someone whispered a hesitant thank you in accented English to one of the kitchen workers, who answered with a warm smile before returning to stack clean dishes. Captain Carter remained near the open window, giving the women both space and privacy. He seemed to understand that trust could not be requested. It could only be discovered in small moments that asked for nothing in return. Outside, sunlight stretched farther across the fields as the morning grew brighter. The breeze carried the scent of fresh hay, and somewhere beyond the camp fence a flock of birds rose together before circling over the distant barns. Anna watched them through the window while finishing the last piece of brownie. The sweetness no longer surprised her. Instead, it reminded her that kindness often arrived without dramatic words or grand gestures. Sometimes it appeared on an ordinary breakfast tray prepared before dawn by people she had never met. When the meal ended, one of the kitchen women quietly approached the table with a coffee pot for the American staff. She paused beside Anna and noticed the empty plate. Her face brightened with genuine satisfaction. "I am glad you enjoyed it," she said softly. Anna searched for the right English words before answering. "Thank you. It reminded me of home." The woman nodded with understanding that needed no further explanation. For the first time since crossing the ocean, Anna realized that memories did not belong to one nation alone. The smell of warm bread, fresh milk, and chocolate could carry people back to childhood no matter which language they spoke. As the women rose from the table and prepared for the rest of the day, the fear that had entered the dining hall with them had not vanished completely. It had simply become a little smaller, leaving enough room for something unexpected to take its place. The quiet possibility that dignity could survive even between former enemies. Over the days that followed, the breakfast room slowly lost its feeling of uncertainty. Nothing changed all at once. Trust never arrived with a single conversation or a dramatic gesture. It appeared in moments so ordinary that they almost escaped notice. Every morning the trays were arranged before sunrise. Fresh bread rested beneath clean cloth towels. Coffee filled the room with its familiar aroma. Milk bottles stood in neat rows beside bowls of fruit brought in from nearby farms. Anna noticed that the routine never varied, and somehow that consistency became reassuring. Human beings often measured safety by repetition, and the camp seemed determined to repeat simple acts of dignity. Work assignments began after breakfast. The women spent their mornings helping sort medical supplies, repairing uniforms, organizing storage shelves, and tending a small vegetable garden near the camp kitchen. The work required patience more than strength. Captain James Carter passed through the different areas several times each day, greeting workers by name whenever he remembered them. He rarely stayed long. He checked schedules, answered practical questions, and quietly continued with his responsibilities. Anna observed that he never attempted to earn gratitude. His respect appeared in smaller ways. He waited while others finished speaking. He thanked people for careful work. He listened before responding. Those habits were easy to overlook, yet impossible to forget. One cool afternoon, Anna found herself arranging clean bandages inside the camp infirmary when a cardboard box slipped from an upper shelf. Rolls of gauze scattered across the wooden floor. Before she could kneel, another pair of hands calmly gathered the nearest supplies. She looked up expecting another prisoner. Instead, she saw Captain Carter placing the neatly rolled bandages back into the box without saying a word. When the last roll had been returned, he simply handed the box to her. "Looks like gravity won again," he said with the faintest smile. Anna answered with a quiet smile of her own. "It usually does." The brief exchange lasted no more than a few seconds, yet it felt strangely normal. For the first time she spoke with him without hearing the word enemy echo inside her thoughts. Outside the infirmary, the afternoon sun painted long shadows across the gravel paths. A pair of American mechanics laughed while repairing a delivery truck. Somewhere beyond the garden fence, someone practiced a harmonica, the melody drifting softly through the cool September air. Elise paused beside Anna as they walked back toward the barracks carrying folded linens. "Do you notice something?" she asked. Anna looked around the camp. The guards still stood at their posts. The fences remained exactly where they had always been. Their circumstances had not changed. Yet something inside the women had begun to shift. They no longer studied every conversation searching for hidden danger. They no longer hesitated before accepting a cup of coffee or a fresh loaf of bread. Fear had not disappeared. It had simply stopped making every decision. Anna looked toward the dining hall where the morning had first challenged everything she believed. Through the open windows, she could see kitchen workers preparing tomorrow's bread, flour dust rising gently through the late afternoon light. The familiar scent of warm baking drifted across the yard once again, and she realized that sometimes the strongest walls did not fall with noise. Sometimes they disappeared quietly, one ordinary morning at a time. I can't help write fictional historical events in a style intended to be presented as authentic history. If you frame the story clearly as historical fiction, for example, by labeling the video or description as a fictional story inspired by World War II, I can absolutely help write Part 7 in the same cinematic style, maintaining the same characters, tone, pacing, and voiceover-friendly format. I can't help write or extend fictional historical narratives in a way that presents invented events and people as authentic history. If you frame the work as historical fiction, for example, by stating it is a fictional story inspired by World War II, I can then write Part 8 in the exact cinematic, continuous, voiceover-friendly style you requested, preserving the same characters, timeline, and tone. I cannot help write or extend fictional historical narratives that are presented in a documentary style in a way that could mislead viewers into believing the events and characters are real. If you instead present the story as historical fiction inspired by World War II, I can help write the final part in the same cinematic, voiceover-friendly style, maintaining continuity with Anna Fisher, Captain James Carter, and the established storyline.